All right, it is now 1:01 and we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kira Bradford, and I am co-PI and technical lead of the HEAL Data Stewardship Group. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the second installment in our Fresh Fair webinar series. Today's webinar is called Finding a Home for Your HEAL Data, and we'll focus on a high-level overview of the HEAL data ecosystem and how you can participate in it by finding a long-term home for your study data. This webinar will consist of a presentation followed by a live Q&A. If at any point you have a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box. Note that this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be emailed to all registrants. Today, I am joined by Dr. Alex Waldrop. Alex is a senior bioinformatics and machine learning scientist in the Genomics, Bioinformatics, and Translational Research Center at RTI International. He also serves as the data engagement lead for the HEAL Data Stewardship team. A computer scientist by training with a PhD in bioinformatics and more than 10 years of experience in big data analytics, his work focuses on leveraging the power of machine learning to solve real-world problems across the biological, environmental, and social science domains. His scientific background includes various applications of high-throughput sequencing data to biological systems, including projects in microbiomics, population genetics, cancer genomics, transcriptomics, and statistical behavioral genetics. His computational background has focused largely on leveraging natural language processing techniques to improve data findability and harmonization through the development of tools like DUG, a semantic search engine for biomedical data sets developed for the NHLBI's Biodata Catalyst ecosystem. Alex, thank you so much for leading us through this talk today. We're looking forward to learning more about finding a home for our data.
Hi all. Thank you, Kira, for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'd like to continue our Fresh Fair webinar series by talking to you about finding a home for your HEAL data within the HEAL data ecosystem. For an overview of today's agenda, I'll first be giving a high-level overview of the HEAL data ecosystem and HEAL platform, talk about how you can participate in those efforts by finding a long-term home for your HEAL data. And next, I'll be joined by Jessica Mazurek of the NIH HEAL Data Ecosystem Program Office to answer any questions about data repository selection, the HEAL platform, and any other topic we touch on today. Finally, I'll turn things back over to my colleague Kira to send us away with some final thoughts. So our goal for today's discussion, I want you to get three things out of today. First, I want you to gain an intuitive understanding of what the HEAL data ecosystem actually is. Second, I want you to understand how your data becomes a part of the HEAL data ecosystem. And thirdly, we want you to feel empowered to make a repository selection for your data using the FAIR principles that we outline here in the repository selection quiz that we'll be introducing later. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Let's zoom out for a minute and just touch on the unique opportunity represented by the HEAL initiative. Thanks in part to tremendous advances in available computing power over the last decade with the advent of cloud computing and high performance resources, in tandem with the critical methodological advances in neuroimaging and genomics, the HEAL initiative is uniquely positioned to expand our understanding of the biological and social factors underlying opioid addiction in ways that would have been conceivable even 10 years ago. More importantly, the discoveries coming from HEAL studies will be directly enlisted to create science-backed solutions to some of the most pressing public health crises of our era. So before we dive into the details of how we plan to integrate data across HEAL studies, I wanted to remind us of that kind of current and future importance that these data represent, and just to keep a lens on that as we go through these. Zooming back in, to tackle the life and death questions posed by the opioid crisis, the HEAL initiative has taken a remarkably comprehensive and broad-based approach to understanding the biologic and social basis of opioid addiction. And as part of that comprehensive approach, projects funded through HEAL will comprise one of, if not the most diverse research portfolios across the NIH from a data type standpoint. From a sheer numbers standpoint as well, as of today, this will include more than 700 studies, or around 700 studies. These 700 studies will be generating more than 20 distinct data modalities, including diverse data types ranging from things like neuroimaging to to genomics, to clinical data in an attempt to study the biology of addiction from several distinct perspectives. More, these data aren't just being generated in humans. Together, HEAL studies will be generating data across a range of model species: mice, rats, monkeys, sheep. I think there was even a mollusk study or two that was proposed in there. So we're really running the gamut here. From a research standpoint, the resulting HEAL datasets will collectively provide one of those multifaceted looks at addiction and pain management, likely in human history, and hopefully yield breakthrough discoveries in the fight against opioid addiction and chronic pain. Here's the caveat though. Much of the long-term value and promise of HEAL data depends on our ability to integrate these diverse data streams into a manageable resource for scientific, academic, and policy communities. After all, how can we unite the pain and addiction research communities conceptually if we can't integrate those data practically? Thus is kind of the raison d'etre, if you will, pardon my French, of the HEAL data ecosystem. To provide access to data generated across those more than 700 HEAL studies via a single portal called the HEAL platform, which you can see on the right there. Obviously, this will be a tremendous challenge. And indeed, the central challenge of the HEAL platform is just figuring out how do we make more than 20 plus data types from 700 studies across 8 different animal models findable through a single portal, right? That's a challenge. It might surprise you that we can draw from everyday technology that we already use to help understand the approach that the HEAL data ecosystem and the platform are taking. But we can. And the one that I want to use that I think most people will resonate with is your cable TV, or just your TV if you have one. So bear with me on this, but over time, cable TV has evolved into this remarkably diverse array of content. But it's not by directly creating the content itself that it has become so diverse. Rather, it provides access to specialized channels that, for the most part, each focus on producing very specific type of shows. For instance, you might have news channels like CNN or PBS, or sports channels like ESPN, movie channels like HBO, da-da-da-da-da. Notice here that the cable provider, let's say Comcast or something, doesn't itself produce any sports shows. But it does allow people to watch the content on ESPN or NBC Sports. Or, each of these channels over time has become streamlined to address the specific challenges specific to the type of content they produce. So for instance, CNN is probably more adept at producing live TV on location than, say, Animal Planet. By producing the centralized access to a bundle of specialized channels, cable TV provides a breadth of depth of content that no single network could provide on its own, even though it's not actually producing any content itself. We have a similar vision for the HEAL platform with existing channels, if you were, for databases that specialize in the data types that HEAL studies will be generating. So as opposed to creating a monolithic database to host the remarkably diverse HEAL data, we plan to host data across a number of existing domain-specific data repositories that best know how to deal with certain types of data. Much like the way your cable TV bundles shows across different channels, the HEAL platform will provide centralized access to HEAL data stored across data repositories specializing in subdomains like clinical data, or neuroimaging, genomics, or mice data even perhaps, as these essentially know best how to deal with the data. Indeed, that's kind of the credo of the HEAL platform. Existing repositories know how best to handle the data types HEAL studies will be generating. So why reinvent the wheel? Ultimately, the goal of this federated approach is to create a unified portal for search and analysis across HEAL studies. As you can see here, the process at a high level will look something like this, all right? So as a HEAL investigator, you will select a repository from a vetted list of existing data repositories provided by the HEAL stewards. Once your data and metadata have been submitted and curated by that chosen repository, the HEAL platform will then be able to catalog your study metadata via a process called indexing. Ultimately, the HEAL platform will then use these metadata to make your study findable and in many cases accessible within the HEAL platform. So almost like when you're looking at cable TV for the descriptions of shows and the names of them, that's similar to how we'll be um, showcasing and spotlighting data and metadata that are available on the Heal platform through that metadata. So let's just take a second to level set. There is no Heal central repository, is that what I'm saying? And that is actually precisely what I'm saying. And that's because instead of trying to reinvent data standards and practices and data management practices across fields as disparate as human brain imaging and zebrafish genomics, we want data to live where they would naturally. The Heal platform will be a set of technologies to integrate data across this ecosystem through a single unified portal. That's the big take home. Okay, so what does this practically look like? Let's say I'm a researcher who wants to look for Heal studies that looked at buprenorphine, which is a commonly used treatment for opioid use disorder. So by searching for buprenorphine on the platform, I might be able to have access or know about or be able to find an MRI study of brains undergoing withdrawal with and without buprenorphine on the Open Neuro database, while at the same time, I could use the platform to find a data set on Figshare that looked at the public health impacts of free buprenorphine programs in at-risk communities. So the practical question I'm sure you're asking yourself is how you can make your data findable through the ecosystem. The good news is that the first step of making your data findable and available through the ecosystem will always be putting your data somewhere it naturally fits, i.e. the title of this presentation, Finding a Home for Your Data. In many cases, the home for your Heal data might be the same repository you've used for past studies or something you're already very familiar with. And that's kind of the point. The next question then is whether there are certain databases you should be targeting. Again, luckily, that's the job of the Heal Data Stewards. Our role is more or less to help you find the best channel for your show. Said another way, we're in the process of creating a vetted list of Heal compatible databases using a repository selection principles to ensure the long-term sustainability of Heal program data, the ecosystem, and the platform that we'll be building on top of that network of existing repositories. I won't spend too much time belaboring these points, but I did want to make you all aware of the principles by which we have selected the Heal compatible repositories. So here we have 6 criteria that we use to determine whether a repository would be a good home for your data. I'll just go through and talk about them in order. So first and foremost, we value persistence, right? In short, we want repositories to know that they'll be around for 10 or 15 years, a long time after the formal support for maybe your individual project or even the Heal ecosystem has ended. So persistence is a really key critical issue that we consider when weighing whether a repository should be included in the ecosystem. Secondly, we consider fair alignment. This could be interpreted lots of different ways, but by this largely we mean, does the repository enforce fair data practices? By fair, we of course mean findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This could mean a lot of things. So this could include curation of study and variable level metadata that is interoperable across platforms. This could also mean, does the database use an ontology-backed metadata model? Does it provide programmatic access to data and or metadata via API or other means? Where possible, we would like to include repositories that adhere to best practices with respect to data fairness and data readiness. Additionally, we consider the suitability of the database for Heal study data. If possible, we would like your data to live in a repository where other like data types live. So for instance, if you are using zebrafish as a model organism, we'd like your data to stay close to other zebrafish data rather than having to shove it into a maybe more fair aligned database that deals primarily with human data. So when possible, we like to take the semantic context of the database and the data types that they collect into consideration when considering whether it's a choice for our environment. Next, data governance is a big consideration for Heal databases, right? So Heal studies require a full spectrum of data governance. This could range anywhere from mice studies that can be freely seen without any restrictions, to highly sensitive, identifiable clinical data that has from humans that requires very strict data use limitations. Our job as HEAL stewards is to make sure that each level of data governance is represented among the repositories we select, to make sure that we're able to serve the entire spectrum of data governance needs across the across HEAL awards. Next, we have cost. This seems pretty straightforward. Where possible, we'd like the repository to be free or minimal long-term cost, both to the data submitters and to downstream data users. That's a consideration that we are that we prioritize. Finally, we also consider future expansion plans. So, for instance, if a repository is deficient in one or more criteria, but they do lots of other things well, we take into account whether or not they have direct plans to ameliorate certain issues. So maybe they don't provide an API, but might in the future. That's something that we'd like to be able to work with repositories to do in order to better participate in the ecosystem. Ultimately, we'd like to make this a rising tide that lifts all boats. So, although it's good for you to be aware of these repository selection principles, we're not actually going to ask you to apply them in practice just based on those abstract kind of conceptions. The easiest way for HEAL investigators to determine where their data should live would be by taking our repository selection quiz. So almost like a HEAL version of the Harry Potter sorting hat, as you can see there on the right, we've created a quiz that will help guide you through a series of simple yes or no questions that ask you things about ranging from, ask you basically expected data types or data sharing requirements in order to recommend the best possible repository based on your specific needs. So by following the link below, which is also posted in the Zoom chat and on the HEAL ecosystem Slack group, you can even take the quiz for yourself as I walk through a couple of examples just to figure out how it works. Before we dive in, as a disclaimer, I want to note that the current version of the repository selection quiz is still a work in progress. We welcome any and all feedback, and we would genuinely love to hear how relevant our suggested repository was to your data needs as we work on finalizing the quiz. So please reach out via the Slack or even via the Q&A after this. As a first example, let's explore a couple use cases. First, let's start off exploring a pretty common use case and use the quiz to determine where the hypothetical researcher should store their data. For this use case, let's assume I'm leading a study where I'm measuring clinical outcomes from an experimental trial in humans of a novel technique to address chronic back pain. Okay, this is a fairly typical this is fairly typical of data across HEAL-funded studies. You have clinical data from human subject, likely has some personally identifiable information, which means we'd need proper access control to determine who can and can't view our data. And for the simplicity, let's just assume that there's only one type of data that will be collected. This is the only type of data we'll be collecting. Kind of garden variety, qualitative and quantitative data about our patients, their response to the treatment, and some associated covariates we'd like to control for. So maybe some demographic information. So when I first click on the link to the HEAL quiz, I'll be met with a screen that looks like this. For now, you'll be able to you'll need a Gmail account to be able to view the quiz, but in the future, we hope to make the quiz accessible without having to sign up for anything. The first question asks kind of seems like a trap, but it's not. And it's, does your study plan to generate data? It's not a trap and it's not a typo. But actually a non-negligible chunk of HEAL awards are not planning to produce any data at all. So these usually entail things like administrative cores or planning studies tasked with designing future studies in topics of interest. In most cases, this question won't apply to you, and you'll typically know who you are if it does apply to you. In the case you don't produce any data, good news, the question is done for you. It will gracefully exit once you click no. But in our example, however, I'll be producing data. So I'm going to go ahead and answer yes to this question. Next, it asks me if my award requires me to share my data. This also at first might seem confusing, but a good number of HEAL studies are funded through small business mechanisms and therefore are producing some intellectual property that they aren't required to share. In these cases, we would ask the members to consider sharing metadata about their study and potentially some explanatory slides through a generalist repository like Figshare. But they're not actually required to share any of the IP information that is protected. Again, in most cases, if you're not sure whether you have to share data, the answer is probably that you do. But if you're really not sure about this question, you can always contact the HEAL stewards. That's what we're here to help with, and we'll help you figure out what your requirements are and what you need to share. But back in our case, in our example, there's no IP that we need to worry about. So our sharing, so our answer is yes, we're required to share data. Next, it asks me whether my reward requires me to use a specific repository. In some cases, the actual award letter will specify that you must deposit your data into a specific repository. In those cases, we only ask that you comply with the repository selection specified in your award letter, and we can handle the rest. For the sake of our example, let's say my award letter didn't specify anything specific with respect to repository. Okay, so this is our first data type specific question. Next is asking us whether our data come from human subjects. In this case, remember, we're collecting results from a clinical trial on a back pain treatment technique. Answer is yes, easy enough. Next, it's asking us whether our data include omics data. It's kind of a broad category, but we generally mean anything with the word omics in the title. The genomics, metabolomics, proteomics are all good examples. For our specific example, we don't have any omics data. Does your data include image data? Again, our answer is no. Remember, we're just essentially including, maybe a pain measure here or there and some demographic features and some identifiable characteristics. Does our data require access controls? Interesting. So this is what we actually specifically talked about. We do need access controls because of the personally identifiable information. So we're definitely going to want to answer yes to this question. And voila. So just after just a few questions, the quiz is recommending that we use or consider using a repository like ICPSR, which is a social science repository. If you're unfamiliar with ICPSR or any of the repository selections, the quiz will also provide a quick link to help you learn more about that recommendation. In general, we anticipate that ICPSR or something similar will be a fairly common landing spot for clinical data from human subjects, something with good curation, and that also will help you be able to honor the data use and data access agreements that you made with your consenting study participants. Okay, so that use case was very helpful in letting us explore the types of questions the quiz uses to recommend repositories for human data. Let's try an animal example just to explore more of the quiz terrain here. So in this use case, let's say I'm generating RNA-seq data from a mouse model of pain to determine whether certain pathways are activated by an experimental compound. Okay. So back to the beginning of the quiz we go. Again, let's assume that I'm required to share data. Boom. Let's also assume that I'm not required to use a specific repository in my award letter. This time, we'll answer no for whether our data come from human subjects. Next, we're immediately asked whether our data come from mice. They do, but this is by far the most common animal model used across HEAL studies. So it makes sense that it'd be asking us right off the bat. Okay, now we're being asked whether we're collecting omics data from mice. In this case, our answer is yes. So RNA-seq data is a pretty fundamental type of omics data. You could also call it transcriptomics data. In general, if you aren't sure of whether your data meets a specific definition that we're outlining in the quiz, it doesn't help to play around with the quiz to see what repositories you get under different scenarios. And if it's really unclear, you can always just contact the stewards. But again, these are things that we'd like feedback on as we help develop and finalize the quiz. So feel free to reach out where there's any ambiguity. Next, once we've answered yes to that question, We're immediately shown that the quiz is suggesting we use the mouse genome informatics database. Again, we're given a link to the repository so we can learn more about the database and how to submit our data to that. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit of ground today. I wanted to hone in on some key takeaways before we pivot to our Q&A, okay? First, the HEAL ecosystem is going to integrate data from more than 700 products and to create an unprecedented resource for pain and addiction research that will be around, hopefully, long into the future and be a very, very valuable resource. Secondly, the HEAL data platform is not a centralized data repository, but it will be a centralized portal through which you can interact with HEAL data. The thinking here is we want to let domain experts handle diverse data types that HEAL will be collecting. Third, in order to find a home for your HEAL data, you want to use the HEAL Data Stewards Repository Selection Quiz that we just walked through. So, without any further ado, I'll be opening the floor to questions now. In addition to questions you have for me, we also have Jessica Mazurek in the office. In the audience. Jessica is the director of the data ecosystem for HEAL and can speak to questions about specific HEAL policies. So let's go ahead and open it up.
Alex, there's a question in there. What does HEAL stand for? Maybe we should jump in and start with that real quick. It's helping to end addiction long-term. I'll drop the link to the initiative, or maybe Steph can drop the link to the initiative website in the chat as well.
All right, here's another question. What are the minimum quality standards for data collection to have your data added to the HEAL repository? I'll take a chance at fielding this one. So the quality standards are going to be determined by the data types that you have and the repositories that we'll be sending you to. Obviously, HEAL, because there is no central HEAL repository, there's no one size fits all policy for what data and metadata standards should be applied to data. And that's why we're letting the databases that make up the HEAL ecosystem decide what the data standards are for the specific types of data that we think they know how to deal with. So for instance, if you are gathering genomics data, we would send you to a place like dbGaP and they would determine the minimal standards that you need. Does that help clarify the question? I guess there's no call and response, so hopefully that does. Let's see. Got another question here too. Can non-HEAL researchers use the quiz? It seems helpful. Absolutely. I don't see why not. I mean, we applied the principles broadly to research databases in order to discover which repositories would be vetted and added to our list. So there's nothing necessarily HEAL specific about any of the subdomains in most cases. So it could be a helpful a helpful resource for other projects. Okay, third question. What does answering no to the data access control question mean? Would this only be a no for publicly available data? So by what we mean for access controls are essentially, do you need the ability to say who can or can't view the data? So if you answer no to the data access control, you would assume that somebody would be able to download the entire data set, not de-identified or anything. So when you have human data, you almost always are going to want access controls. And if you have something like mouse data, or if you have, say, human data that is completely de-identified and you just want to release the study, we would have another recommendation for you based on the level of access controls that you need.
you want me to take this one, Alex? The next question is,
Yeah.
all right, great. What if a study had already submitted data to a repository, but the quiz results recommends a different repository? So I'll say that to some extent, we're still in exploration mode here, and we're trying to identify all the best places to store HEAL data. And we also understand that the HEAL teams are the folks who best understand your data. So if you've submitted somewhere, please come to the stewards and tell them about it and talk to them about it. Even if it's not in the decision tree or not the one that comes out at the end as the recommended repository, because it will help us learn and we can then go and explore that repository as well.
That's a great answer. Okay, got another one. What if you're generating multimodal data? Do you take the quiz for every type of data? I would also say that my answer depends on that, or that it depends is my answer for that. So there are certain types of multimodal data. So you could have like clinical data and genomics data where there might actually be databases that are designed specifically to hold both of those modes of data. There are, you could also have something like MRI imaging of brains and genomics data, and those should probably belong in two separate repositories. That is something that we are actively trying to work on with the quiz. That is a complex use case. And so if you do feel like maybe part of your data is being left out, that's something we'd love to know as we help try to bridge that use case. And because there is either going to be a database that we haven't found yet, or that maybe is in the list that caters to both of those data types, or maybe we need to, help you go data type by data type and find a series of databases that work for your entire set of studies. All right, question 6. Why do you suggest the Mass Genome Institute, or the Mass Genome Informatics Genomics versus Geo? This is for me. That's a great question. Yeah, I think that a lot of these, and that's where we talk about the quiz not necessarily being finalized. What we've done in order to create this quiz is take a very systematic look at a huge number of repositories across these different areas and tried to score them based on the FAIR principles that we talked about. My guess off the top of my head, specifically for the Mass Genome Informatics versus Geo, is maybe that it had a specific core criteria that it met that maybe Geo didn't, but it's also possible that we missed things. So that's certainly, I myself am not a mouse expert, but I know that there are people on this call who are, and we'd love to hear from you, because ultimately the goal is to make these decisions something that you would probably normally make yourself.
I can start on the next question. Could you please discuss how we determine whether we need access controls for our data again? So if you're doing human subjects research, a lot of folks are collecting data or information about the human subjects that could potentially identify those people. And I think the simplest way to think about it is, even if you strip the identifiers down, you can think about combining data from other studies and potentially augmenting the data set in ways that would allow you to identify those people. So even though you're not sharing direct identifiers and you're de-identifying the data, you still might require certain controlled access so that only people who are proposing to use the data in a certain way for certain research questions and who are approved to use the data would be able to get access to those data. Alex, do you want to add to that at all? That was helpful.
No, I think that was a great answer. I think that there are a lot of different ways that you can deal with the access, whether or not you need access controls. And the HEAL stewards can help you define the approach that works best for you. So in general, my answer is going to be in cases that require judgment calls, if it's not immediately obvious to you, please reach out to us and we're happy to work with you on a case-by-case basis. All right, another question here. How many candidate repositories have you identified? So in total, I think we are up to almost 20. And so these span things like genomics, neuroimaging, animal models, funding program specific, so like NIDA data share. We have generic repositories like Figshare. We have a really good evolving list as well of these databases. And so this is really a great opportunity for people to play around the quiz and let us know what they think of the selections that we've made, and we're happy to further tailor those to better meet people's expectations and needs.
I can jump in and start the next one. Is there a master list of all available data repositories with descriptions of appropriate data types for each? And if so, can this be distributed or made available? So I just want to point out again that I think we're really hoping for feedback from people taking the quiz to, tell us what you think about the suggestion that is offered to you for your data type. And we are in the process of finalizing this activity of recommending repositories for HEAL investigators to store their data. And ultimately, soon, hopefully, the plan is to put this onto healdatafair.org. Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that we're going to be providing that literature as well. So the quiz is actually an interactive version of a decision tree. We can also provide the underlying decision tree to help give people a full scope of the topology of the decisions that they're being asked to make and how those decisions would route you to one repository or another. So that will be also a resource which will hopefully be going to make public shortly.
All right, so the next question, since data will not be stored centrally, will researchers need to go to the individual repositories to request the data? Essentially, the HEAL ecosystem assists in finding the studies and generally describing the type of data collected by the studies. Are you working with the repositories from the quizzes, from the quiz suggestions? So that's the easy answer to that one is yes, we are. We've been having conversations with all of them to understand their data access processes, their data request processes, their technology that they have, whether they have APIs, what their metadata look like. This has all been, part of the conversation that we're having with those repositories, and the stewards and the platform team at University of Chicago have done a lot of work in this space. So yes. And then the question about going to individual repositories to request the access, that is currently what it's looking like so far with most of the repositories that we talk to. They want to own that process, which is good because the platform, yes, can help researchers discover the data and go access the data at the repository. The platform also has workspaces for computation purposes. And so in some cases, researchers may be able to bring data sets from different places and pull them into the workspaces and do some computation there with the analysis tools that the platform will be providing. Oh, sorry. Next question. I work in a field that does not typically share data publicly. What is the bare minimum that I need to do to satisfy NIH? So Alex mentioned this at the front end of his talk, and if you've been to any of the HEAL events or webinars that we put on, and any of the public activities that we hold and public webinars that we hold, we talk about this issue. We're in a major public health crisis with overdose deaths that are continuing to rise. And we know a large percentage of folks that use opioids also have pain. So we want to ensure that HEAL-funded research investments can most fully address this urgent situation. And we're really committed to sharing data and findings. And this is something that NIH is emphasizing, but importantly, we've also heard this from HEAL stakeholders, how important it is to share data. So we'd encourage you to think outside of your normal data sharing box. What is possible to share? Are there subsets of the data sets that would be valuable to researchers if they could be shared? I think at one point Alex mentioned SBIRs. One idea there is potentially thinking about how you might share pre-competitive data. Another example is summary or aggregate data. So I think this is another area where I'd say that the stewards can have one-on-one discussions with investigators who have this concern and help them really think through what might be possible.
Great answer. All right, I'll take this question. If different data types from the same participants are in different databases, for example, say you have proteomics going to PRIDE and genotypes in dbGaP, how does HEAL handle the mapping back to the same participant? Will HEAL hold the data mapping files for all study participants? That is a great question. That is one that the mechanics of that will continue to evolve. The University of Chicago team, that is a very platform specific question that I think that's an active thing that they are starting to figure out, and something that I don't have the precise mechanics of, although it is a problem, or it's something that we are aware of and that we will try to be designing the system for that specific use case.
Yeah, I'll just add that there's obviously that's the value, right, to doing this. And so that's kind of, we're talking a lot about just discoverability right now, but the harmonization is sort of the next step, and how we do that harmonization. So we're very focused, especially in our external discussions, about the discoverability of data. And I think that, harmonization is something that we're talking about a lot internally and thinking how to make that possible.
I can take this one. So once you have a repository selected, what do you need to do? Do you need to report this to HEAL, NIH, or others, or update your data sharing plan? First would be communicating with the HEAL stewards and the HEAL platform. We are potentially creating a more formal mechanism, such as a place that you can go directly on the platform and say, here's my study, please index it. There are a lot of options yet, and that's something that we will continue to nail down. Long term, our goal is to make kind of a comprehensive roadmap for how you go from, okay, I've got my data ready to share, to how it ends up on the HEAL platform, of which the repository selection quiz will be a part of it. And then the next step on that quiz will be, after you've submitted your data to the repository that you've chosen, how does it then make its way onto the platform? Again, the specific mechanics of it are up in the air right now, but that's something that we're going to be nailing down in the future. Just does that?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. If there are folks out there who are ready to share data right now and haven't been in conversations with the HEAL stewards, please do reach out, because this could be really valuable for us in understanding, what that, or nailing down what that process looks like, and in a way that is sort of accessible to the researchers and not overburdensome. So please do, if you'd like to be a practice use case for that, let us know.
Seeing a lot of, got a jackhammer in my background, but we're going to push through it. So what if, so seeing some ambiguity about studies wanting to submit to multiple repositories, and that's a great question. And again, that's a use case that we are going to support, obviously, because we know that these studies are going to be very multifaceted and very cross-cutting with the types of data that they include. So for right now, it really depends on a case-to-case basis. Jess, do you want to?
I hear your jackhammering, just a little bit. Oh, the things we're all dealing with these days in this virtual environment, working from home, that you can't see behind our HEAL initiative screen. Yeah, I wouldn't really add anything to that other than under this model, this is one of the benefits of it, right? Is that you can have the option to do that. And so I think that also adds value to the data that you're sharing, right? Because by putting it in a repository that sort of fits the data type, you're going to have better metadata and standards aligned with that data because the repository is good at that domain of data. So, if that's something that you're thinking might be applicable to your project, please, the stewards can help talk you through this, and feel free to reach out and we can, for us, we're still in this mode of exploring and trying to get feedback about the things that we are trying to put into practice. So the more interaction we have with people who have these specific use cases, the better for everyone, I think, because it will really help us learn, which is part of what we're trying to do here. So please reach out. There's a question about data transfer and data use agreements needed to share, and these are typically developed by the programs that are generating the data. And then I think, when you're at the point where you'd submit to a repository, the repository would work with the submitting team on kind of like implementing those through their controlled access process. Is that right, Alex?
Yes. Okay, this is an interesting question. How do you make HEAL data findable and accessible to end users? The short answer is going to be through the metadata that we provide and curate, that you all will be providing and that we will help curate. The long answer, this is a great lead in for November's webinar, where we will be discussing more about metadata and how that makes your data findable and accessible.
That was golden. Oh, Alex, do you want to take this one too? I think this is also metadata related.
All right, so how do you link data sets for data types in the same study that go to different repositories? That, again, there's definitely ambiguity about that. And people are doing a really good job at feeling that out because there's obviously going to be need for people to deposit data across multiple repositories. I think that again, this is going to be something that is going to evolve as we see how prevalent that particular use case is going to be. But we know right now that that's something that we need the platform to be able to do. But as just said, right now we're at least focusing first on making data findable. So at the very least, through the HEAL platform, people would be able to find both of those data sets, hopefully know that they're in the same study, and then we can work on the harmonization bit down the road.
Yeah, on the platform, the way that so that the platform's in beta testing right now, and hopefully we'll be putting it out soon to get feedback on that and to let people start using it and see what's there. But I think, Alex, what you said is right. I mean, the technical details are that the way that Chicago's building this is that the data will be connected to a study. So
Okay, if we're collecting mixed methods data as part of our HEAL study, will we be submitting both? It seems recommendations for qualitative data sharing is still evolving. I think that still evolving is a perfect encapsulation of the process for these kind of mixed modal data types. Again, I think it depends. In some cases, there may be repositories that are specific to the type of mixed methods data that you have that we could help you find, or splitting the data in between multiple repositories and then linking them artificially in the platform itself would be my guess. Jess?
I was just going to add that this answering questions that are a little bit broad like this is kind of difficult because of the diversity across HEAL. So the answers that we're giving are also sort of generic, I think. Whereas if if you have a real concern about this, please talk to us, because if we have a specific example in front of us, we can help you work through that.
All right, we want to go through, so we've got one last question to go through the federated ecosystem model figure again, which we'll happily do. Actually got it here in the closing remarks. How about that? So broad strokes here, the data flows from the left to the right. You and your study is going to be one of the shapes in the left. You have a certain data type that you are going to want to find a home for from among existing data repositories. The corresponding shapes there is meant to reflect that you want to find a data repository that already deals with the types of data that you have. Ultimately, then, once the data from HEAL is distributed and stored across existing data repositories, will be cataloged in the HEAL platform. So HEAL will be consolidating and ingesting or indexing, as it were, the metadata from across each of these different public repositories and aggregating them into the HEAL platform, which will then make them searchable, findable, in many cases, analyzable. So there will be workspaces on the platform that you can pull in certain data sets if they're not very locked down, as well as just collaborate and discover with other people in HEAL doing similar work, maybe asking similar questions, and just a full service platform for data reuse across an extremely heterogeneous data environment that will be HEAL.
Okay, I think this is the last question. Can you discuss the timelines and deadlines for when we should be prepared to submit our data to a repository and share to the HEAL data sharing platform? If we will be completing data collection in the next few months, what timeline should we plan for this process? So if you're completing data collection in the next few months, I would really encourage you to try to identify the repository that you'd like to store those data in and start working with the repository. I think in general, the sooner the better for most studies, because that can help you format things and get things sort of in the right structure in the beginning, versus sometimes having to reorganize things at the end. But as far as data sharing goes, I mean, HEAL's policy for public access and data sharing, we really want the data shared no later than upon publication. So working back from that, you can think about how long it's going to take to get the data into the repository and get it ready to share.
That sounds great. I just want to thank everyone so much. Before we end off here, I wanted to hand it back to Kira. Thanks again, Jess, for coming, and thank you all so much. Kira, you wanna play us out here?
Sure, Alex. Thank you for leading this talk today. And also, again, thank you, Jess, for stepping in to field more than just a few questions just now. For the audience, we hope that you're leaving with a better understanding of how the HEAL data ecosystem will be structured and the steps that you can take to find a good home or repository for your data. I want to let everyone on the call know that there are quite a few ways you can reach out to the HEAL stewards for more information and support. Most importantly, tomorrow, if you have additional questions about any of the materials that you saw today, or you took the quiz and you want to talk to us as soon as possible, tomorrow we are holding an office hour session from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time for anyone that would like to drop in and informally chat with our team about their repository choices. We'll be sending this connectivity information for that session in an email to follow shortly after this webinar. In addition to that information, we will also be emailing a link to our Slack workspace and our Connect with Us form. These are two other great ways to get in touch with us at any time. We hope that those of you who participate in the repository selection quiz, please take a few moments and share with us your results in the repositories channel in the Slack workspace. We'd love to know what you think. And finally, we hope you guys will save the date for our next webinar on November 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be discussing, as Alex alluded to, metadata, what it is, why it's important, and how it can add value to the HEAL data ecosystem. And with that, I'll close this off. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.